Now, visual testing is probably a new concept for the majority of us. I know that when I first started out, I have never really done automated visual validation simply because the old ways of doing it, doing something like pixel to pixel comparison, was not robust enough, and so it was very flaky and you needed tolerance, and it didn't provide any good results. But now with the addition of Applitools, visual validation is something that is critical and is extremely important. And once you start utilizing it, you start finding out how many visual bugs there can actually be in different kinds of web applications. So I wanted to show you some examples of real visual bugs that have happened to real web applications. Check out this bug from UPS website on a mobile device. You can see how you actually can't read anything that's going on here, and so these two areas have kind of coalesce together, and now this is unreadable. That is a visual bug, and it's very easy to catch this bug using Applitools. Here is another visual bug from a online newspaper. You can see that their text actually wraps into the next and covers up the very first line of this text right here. And it's really funny because as I'm working through teaching this tutorial, I'm actually discovering a ton of visual bugs on my own website, which is great because I can show those examples, but it kind of sucks because I realize that I need to do a lot more work to make my website more visually and user friendly. Take a look at this. See how in this specific resolution, which is not a bad resolution, but it's smaller than I'm used to. I'm used to looking at it in 1080p. The website actually starts to put all of the menu options on top of my logo, and so you can't even read it. This icon here as well, I don't think that's a good place for it because there's a search icon and it's kind of in the middle of a random place. If anything, maybe it should be like somewhere over here, but again, real visual bugs that I'm actually having problems with. So, why do visual bugs actually happen? It's just simply a matter of the test traceability matrix. A single web page can have hundreds of different combinations. You can have multiple different operating systems: Android, iOS, Windows. You can have different kinds of operating system versions, right? Lollipop, iOS 10, 11, and so on. And so now you have to start testing your web application on all of these different devices in all of the different operating system versions. You also have to take into consideration the different screen resolutions. What I showed you with my website was actually just a different screen resolution for the same exact website. And even though it was on the same exact browser, the same exact operating system, the different screen resolution caused a bug on ultimateqa.com. You also have to take into consideration all of the different font sizes and how they will be reflected on different combinations of environments. And there are even different languages, such as English, German, French, that you have to take into consideration, and how all of that will look for just a single web page. So my Ultimate QA homepage, as you're going to see in the future, we're going to test it on multiple different resolutions. And on each resolution, it looks different because my website is responsive. And so we have to analyze whether on each of those resolutions, the website is actually looking good, and if it has any bugs. And it just becomes simply too much to test all of this. And even in an automated functional testing perspective, it is way too hard and way too much. So that's why visual bugs happen, is because we don't have the coverage for all of these different devices and matrices. So that is why you actually must automate visual checks. So think about how you would actually automate all of the functional checks using any tool, right? Selenium WebDriver or Coded UI or whatever tool you're using. How would you actually check that all of the elements and the entire web page looks as it should? So for example, this element over here, you can see that it's not very readable. So first of all, that's a bug that I need to fix on my end because I didn't test the application in this resolution. I'm always looking at on a giant 1080p screen, and to me, the web page looks absolutely fine. However, in this other resolution, you can see that you can't even read the logo at the bottom and it looks kind of pixelated. And so that isn't good. So how would we actually test it using Selenium, right? You have to get the logo, you have to check its resolution. But even if you get its resolution, I guess at some point you have to figure out what is the expected resolution and what is the expected size of the logo. And then once you know that, you can compare it. But then also, how about this, for example? Is this the right text? Is it the right text size? Is it the right text color? There are so many things to check about each of these elements. Even this button, right? Is it the right color? Does it have the right text? Is it in the right location? This is the same exact page over here in a smaller resolution. Take a look at all of the problems that you can see. Look at the logo in the upper left-hand corner, for example. It is now smaller and totally unreadable. Absolutely needs to be fixed. And how about that white space in the center over here? Can you see that? That is definitely a bug, and I had no idea that it even existed until I opened up this page in a smaller resolution. And so now the question is, how would you think about it? How would you even automate this? If you can figure out a way to test for this gap between the two different sections, then does that mean that you need to automate this for testing every single gap between every single section? So, okay, that's pretty complicated, right? So many lines of code. There's also stuff like this where you have to validate that this is the right icon that appears here, and is it the right color? And how about like this gap, for example? Did you know that gaps are extremely visually important? I had no idea until I've been talking to my user experience buddies, and gaps like this are very important. In fact, what's even important is spacing between the letters, right? Because imagine if the letters are too closely spaced. Now things like this, the P will start overlapping with the H, and so things will become unreadable. In fact, something with the appropriate space is much easier to read than something with the incorrect space. And so I actually worked with my UX buddies to design something like this to make it look better and easier to read. But how do you actually automate and test all of that using functional testing in Selenium WebDriver? Can you imagine how many thousands of lines of code it would take to check every single element for every single CSS property? It would be insane. And so that's why Applitools comes in and helps by making it extremely easy with a single method that can check an entire web page. So now, you may be asking, why do we want to use Applitools? There are so many other tools out there. Why should we even do Applitools and use visual validation? Well, for me, one of the very main benefits, and if you worked with test automation for any period of time, even a couple of weeks, you're going to know this, especially the UI automation, that it is extremely flaky, right? It is extremely hard to get an automated, stable, functional UI test. But with Applitools and visual validation, It is very stable. It is the most stable type of UI test automation that I have ever done in my career. In fact, anytime that I run about 9,000 automated visual validations every 2 weeks, none of those ever come back as a false positive or a false negative. We get failures, and it's either a real bug or it's a requirements update that just needs to be made, and then we change the baseline. But I've never had a false positive where something fails and it's really shouldn't be looked at. It was just a matter of a problem in the test. So that's benefit number one. And VV will stand for visual validation. Very stable. And so why does this occur? Well, it occurs because if you look at this HTML page over here, my beautiful HTML page that I drew, what can happen a lot of times is on different browsers, operating systems, elements can shift, right? Maybe this element can shift over. Maybe the text in here could get messed up for whatever reason. Maybe this image over here can totally disappear, any kind of that stuff. Or even maybe the style can change. So now instead of a pink box, it becomes a black box. I made it very weird like that so you can see that it overlaps. And if you wanted to actually automate the testing of this single HTML page, what would you need to do? Well, you would probably need to do something like step one, open the page, right, using Selenium. Then step two, you need to find an element. Step three, what would you do? You could get the CSS style of that element. You know, you could get attribute, and then maybe it's CSS, and then you can assert on that style, and maybe that is referring to like the font of this item right here. So this test is for maybe the font of this item, and you can assert that it matches what is expected. But the problem with that is it's so extensive and it will require so many automated tests in order to make all of this happen. And Applitools has a very smart algorithm that is able to do all of this, and with a single method, it can validate the entire page to make sure that whatever's on the page didn't change compared to the baseline. And it has a very smart algorithm that only detects what is visible to the human eye. So if something shifts by a pixel or two, it's not going to detect it if it's not visible to the human eye. However, if this text, for example, changes from Times New Roman to sans serif, for example, then it will detect it and it will let you know, and then it's up to you to decide what you do with it. And so because of that, the visual validation is really stable because you're not really worried about locating any elements. You're simply looking at the entire page and checking the state of the entire page. And with this, what that means is it leads to the second benefit of using Applitools, and that it's very easy to insert into your current automated visual, into your automated functional test. It's easy, first it's easy to use because it's usually a single method that you need to plug in into your current text. So for example, if we were working on this page here, you would open the page and you wouldn't even need to find element, you wouldn't even need to do any of this. Actually, if you were just using Applitools, what you would do is you would insert another method here called check window. There are several methods that you can insert, but in this case we can do check window. And you would just insert that in this step. And so now, really, your test is only 2 lines of code. Instead of all of these 4 lines of code, your test would only be 2 lines of code. You open the page and you visually validate it. And then you're done. But not only that, it drastically reduces how much code you would have to write. Because remember, imagine if you had to if you had to automate all of these elements for their different attributes, right? You can have stuff like font, color, border, and you get the picture, right? So many elements and to validate on just one page. And Applitools can do it all with one single method. That's why it's so easy to use and so easily plugs into your current automated functional tests. Another benefit, I briefly mentioned this, but I want to cover it more in depth now, is Applitools actually has a very smart algorithm for identifying whether the current page matches to the baseline. And a lot of people, when they hear visual validation right away, they think, oh, pixel to pixel comparison, it's so flaky, or I guess you have to set a tolerance, and maybe sometimes you'll get false positives, sometimes you'll get false negatives. No, it doesn't work like that. It's much smarter than that. There is no tolerance. There are different levels of visual validation you can do, but you don't have to worry about any tolerance, 75%, 90% tolerance, pixel to pixel problems. No, it's really smart. I just forgot how to spell algorithm. I think that's right, but for some reason it doesn't seem right. Anyway, that's supposed to be algorithm. So how does the algorithm tell you if the current page has failed compared to the baseline? Well, if a shift on the page has occurred and it's visible to the human eye, Applitools will spot it for you. So for example, if this has shifted in any way that is visible, Applitools will tell you. However, if this has moved by like a pixel, which may happen from device to device, different devices may, cut off a pixel here or add an extra pixel there, or maybe there's different coloring, right? A 4K display versus a 1080p display might be a little bit different. So because of that, those kinds of changes would not be spotted to you by Applitools, as a result, avoiding the false positives. But if it is visible to the human eye, it will spot it for you, and it will let you know, hey, there's a failure, figure out whether that's a bug, or you need to update your baseline. And the final benefit of Applitools that I really like is it plugs into so many different tools and environments that you already use. It plugs into all flavors of Selenium. Well, I'm going to say everywhere. It may not be 100% everywhere, but it's pretty much anything that you really want to use. For example, it does all flavors of Selenium WebDriver, all bindings, Java, C#, Ruby, Python, whatever. It plugs into even stuff like UFT. I'm not sure if you heard of it. LeanFT. That's the new version of UFT. It plugs into stuff like Coded UI. You can use it in technologies like Appium. And you can even use it in like continuous integration environments like TeamCity. That's not how you spell team. Jenkins. It basically plugs in everywhere that you need it. And so therefore it is extremely easy to use, and their API is easily reusable across all the different platforms. When you understand it in one, you basically understand it in all of them. So that's why I really enjoy Applitools, and I'm very impressed by everything they've been doing.